I will spare you from listening to my summer vacation plans in audio and video format, so we don't have speakers to do that. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Great crowd. Standing room only. For those that are not here, we enjoy that. Hold back there. Now, hold the door open for your friends out there. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to be here today. My name is Bill Cullifer. I'm the Executive Director for the Organization for Web Professionals, webprofessionals.org. I'm also the chair of this WhyITNow.org initiative, which is about promoting IT in a broad sense, and also a YCTE, promoting career technical education and explaining why people should care. I'm here today presenting Web Professional Education Training and Best Practices Roundtable, or I should say Straight Table. In this case, I have the pleasure to be here with Gary Page, a consultant from the Department of Education out of Sacramento, and to his left, David Michael Rengh, a longtime member and educator, professor at West Hills College in Northern California. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome panelists today. Today we're going to cover a variety of topics that covers the relevant knowledge and skills required by web professionals today. We'll introduce you to some curriculum best practices necessary for teaching within the web design and development field from WOW, a 13-year-old nonprofit professional association started by me with the purpose of promoting community, education, and certification for web professionals worldwide, with strong emphasis on education on two levels. One, promoting best practices for students, pathways, if you will, and then promoting education for educators that desperately need assistance in keeping pace with this frantic stuff we call the web. So with that, welcome, thank you. I have a couple of topics that I wanted to cover today with my esteemed colleagues and panelists here today. Barriers and opportunities in IT and new media education. Keys to establishing effective partnership and advisory panels. Steps identifying and recruiting industry and education pathway champions, something we've been doing and working on ongoing for 13 years. Successful partnership strategies. Which skills are current employers are looking for when they hire web professionals. Some of the specifics, which we hope to provide you with some walkaways. So later on, if you have a card or if we can create a mailing list, I promise you that you'll get some really good resources deep in science that you can take home or take back to the classroom. What national surveys are telling us, the role of certification in the space today, and then the role of education and training in the field. And I make the distinction between education and training because as professional educators, you know that there is a distinction, but I think it's worthy of talking about today from my point of view, and I'll raise that to my colleagues as well to discuss. So that's the topics. The takeaways, we hope, will be that you'll listen, understand, and discuss with us. This is an open format. This is a roundtable. The goal here is to hear from you what issues you're facing, what concerns that you have, so we can collectively talk about this and hopefully come up with some walkaways on action items so we can address some of those issues. We also want to talk about steps that we took as an organization, a membership-supported organization, working with business and industry, government and education over the past 13 years, and look for some key concepts that you can employ to your situation. Basically today our goal is to provide you with some deliverables, some outcomes in compensation for your time so you can take these back to the classroom. Our goal is clear: improve student outcomes and provide resources to teachers. Appreciate and have awareness of opportunities that you face and develop a shared clarity of purpose. We all, it sounds like we have similar interests in web profession. By that, I think we need to work together better to improve the overall experience for the student, and I hope that's why we're here today. So with that said, let's talk about some of the barriers. You know many of these barriers in IT and new media education partnerships, but I'd like to hear you hear from my colleagues that are close to this topic, starting with you, Gary. What are some of the barriers that you know of? And maybe if you could give a brief introduction to how you and I met and some of the barriers that we learned about promoting IT and new media education.
Sure. My role with the California Department of Education is industry sector lead for information technology. And part of what our plan calls for is for leadership at all levels and also to partner with industry. And when I got my position about 2 years ago, I didn't have any partners. And so I knew I needed partners. I went to the internet. I found Bill organization. I had a pathway with web and web design. I gave him a call, and he said, you know, where have you been? I've been waiting. I've been wanting to get involved and engaged. And from that point on, we've had a very interesting, very engaged role over 2 years, and I think it's been amazing, the relationship that we've developed and the progress that we've made. And so I think a lot of what we would talk about would be, you know, how you engage others, collaborate to really make exciting things happen. In talking of the culture and the real vision to reach into the classroom, we're starting from a position that we are going to recognize that what we've done in the past hasn't worked very well. When you look at student outcomes in K-12, we have a lot of dropouts. We've spent a lot of time and money over the years producing a lot of studies and reports. But the reality is if it doesn't get into the classroom, if the teacher doesn't deliver it, and if teachers and the students don't receive it, then it didn't happen in terms of having a real impact on student outcomes. One of the problems with the way we function as a state, I think, is with the top down. We establish standards and we establish, you know, protocols, and a lot of those really haven't been embraced by the teachers as a culture. So teachers, if you're an instructor, you know that once you get within your classroom and shut the door, it's your space. You're in charge. No one's there to watch you or tell you what to do. So we recognize that teachers don't have, as a group, a good, I would say good is a judgment word, but a practice of sharing out very much about what they're doing in the classroom. And so if we're going to make progress through sharing, then we need to address the culture and try to build open, trusting relationships to take away the fear of sharing and make it possible for teachers to share in a way that it's okay. And so one of the things that we would like to do is to develop that trusting relationship, understanding we have a culture that's not accustomed to sharing, and yet we think that's really smart, to find ways to take best practices, to take what works in a classroom and to be able to duplicate and share that. And so I think that's one of the aspects of culture we're talking about.
Fair enough. I appreciate that. David, you and I have known each other for 13 years. You've been teaching at the community college level in California, and you've been close collaborator with WHY. Could you share some of the barriers that you face teaching web? And by the way, I think it's important to note, David has a degree level program in California at West Hills College. It's an associate's degree program within the area of web development. So pretty excited about that. David, over to you. What are some of the barriers?
Okay, first, clarification. I don't teach in Northern California. I teach dead center of the state.
Central California, absolutely. My bad. I guess I wanted to claim them as a Northern California.
That's okay.
Yeah, we have one of the streets where, you know, one side is North Cal and the other side is South Cal. So.
Gotcha.
Probably the biggest barrier I have is exactly where I live. I live in a very small community. My college town is 20,000. We've got campus is bigger than the whole population. And I always felt that I was operating in a fishbowl and nobody cared what I did. And then I started talking to other people and went, well, they do kind of care. So I had to break down that barrier. And my concern is although we live in the middle of nowhere, we're right next door to the largest naval air station that the Navy has, NES Lemoore. And it's not uncommon for a student to be here on Monday and then disappear on Wednesday for several weeks at a time and then have them come home and say, I'm back. Where'd you go? Can't tell you. So that was a huge barrier. So we had to overcome that on how to teach that student in very different locations. One of the things I work closely with at West Hills College is our nursing program. And nurses have a board certification that they take. So if a student starts a class at West Hills College and they finish that course of study at Sacramento State, they have an exam that they pass to make sure that they know how to give a shot. So we're teaching transferable skills. How exactly they go about giving that shot or how they learned about giving that shot isn't really germane to this discussion. It's just that, can they give that shot? And what I started wanting to do for my students was be able to start them in a field of study at my college, and then if they moved anywhere in the state of California, know that what I taught my HTML or my HTML5 class, that skill set was going to transfer when they came up to the San Francisco area. So that was one of the bigger barriers, was making sure that we all taught the same thing. And I think we're all willing to come to the table and discuss it. My barrier is I haven't found very many people that are willing to put it in writing and say, okay, this is our target, how are we going to get there?
Thanks, David, for that. And just to put this in perspective, so when Dave and I first got together 13 years ago with a bunch of folks from business industry, we had a Webmaster Summit in Lake Tahoe, we invited Stanford, Berkeley, 2 community colleges, 3 high schools, Adobe, Microsoft, IBM, and a few others, Pearson Publishing. We kind of outlined the goal of what and what the landscape might look like for a web professional for years to come, right? Started off with a generalist and then more specialist and then more generalist and more specialist. But at the end of the day, what we discovered is that there was a strong need for instructional design strategies that really doesn't exist often in education today relative to the web profession for sure. And then secondly, to have some kind of a credentialing standard and also a degree level program. So more than just credentialing. Degree. Develop some kind of a model where we went from, consider 1996. The information that was available was just that. It was good information oftentimes, but it wasn't structured, right? It was just stuff. Talking heads, subject matter experts talking about stuff. So we've matured, I think, to a great degree from the talking head conference model to an educational degree level program, which I'm really kudos to you and many of your colleagues for accomplishing this, David, because there are barriers to that, right? What you referred to. But the goal was to develop, as David said, something like the nursing program. Mappable, stackable, portable programs that were instructionally designed, that had complete educational environments, so a student living in Detroit wanted to move to San Francisco could pick up courses, or even San Francisco moving to Fresno, transfer those courses, but also have a mappable program that they could take that would be, I think, on par with the nursing program. We're a long ways away from that, and I don't know if I'll live long enough to ever see that, but the goal would be to have a program for web professionals that was on the same stature of the nursing program, a 2-year degree, fully flushed out nationwide, or if not statewide, that has a nursing program level degree, that sophistication. So with that, what are some of the other bureaucracy or issues? I mean, we talked about data. You don't have a lot of data. That's, I think, one of the biggest issues that you have, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, we do need data to target instruction in the K-12 system. We want to make sure that the courses being offered in the high schools, for example, match with the needs of the community for employees. And so making sure that doing the workforce development planning, making sure that there are jobs, so when the students complete a course of study, they actually have employment if they want it right then, or they can move on to college. I'd like to back up to bureaucracy, though, just for a minute, because I think it's important to, first of all, appreciate that we have an organized society, but to also recognize that organization sometimes has unintended consequences of causing us to feel boxed in and create barriers. And so we're often administering programs based on funding source or organization and by budgets that are passed. And so if you think of a typical organization, you've got boxes and you've got lines of authority and you have the job descriptions. And what I'm finding is that it's important at times to step outside of a defined role, to intentionally collaborate, or to, if I went strictly by a job description, I could say many, many times, well, that's not my job. That's not my job. That's not my job. But in order to make progress, sometimes you have to just act and be willing to take some risk. I've got a very supportive boss, but still I think it's important that you're willing to think outside the box and to explore the relationships. I call it sometimes subversive activity. We have, for example, in my organization, inability to use SurveyMonkey. And I was able to get a hold of SurveyMonkey and used it very effectively to survey teachers around the state and establish, first of all, an understanding of their needs and their perceptions, and then to develop a listserv so we can now communicate. And so while my job description and position would be a cubicle in Sacramento, if I just said that's okay, I'm going to live with this barrier, then I would be ignorant of a lot of knowledge that I should have, and I would be unable to really communicate. So now, because I was willing to take just a little risk and use a survey tool that really wasn't authorized but was made available, I was able to establish a positive working relationship and sort of begin the process of building a trusting relationship with classroom teachers, and therefore, get closer to that goal of reaching inside the classroom and helping teachers, providing them with support and resources and information and opportunities to collaborate. So I think bureaucracy can be a barrier if we let it be. But then, be willing to have an intent of being effective in spite of circumstances. And just because we don't have a budget, don't take that as a defeat. Find a way to make things happen.
Yeah, well said. I think we all understand the bureaucracy, right? Particularly in education today at the community college level. I sense that it's there because I've been around it for a long time. I've got a question for you. It's fair to say that everybody's interested in the web professional topic because you're here. How many of you are teaching web design? Okay, a handful, like 4 or 5. How many are teaching web development? Okay, 4 or 5, maybe 6, 7. How many of you are teaching other web-related topics, not specific to? Okay, so a handful.
You're teaching all 3.
Okay, interesting. So a good mix, good combination of design, development, and other topics. Any volunteers? What are the other topics? Database. Okay, outstanding. So how many of you teach a degree-level program? Wow. Okay, that's hot. That's cool. So anybody want to volunteer why they're here? What do they look? What did you read that you found of interest?
I am here because there aren't women that are finishing our program, and there's some barriers to them. One of them told me it's a good old boys network that doesn't want to break in.
Yeah.
The other one, we offer classes at night, and she has 2 small children and no child care at night.
Right.
And I'm looking at how can we bring more women into the field. We're at a new all-time low in computer science.
That's really.
I can offer one suggestion. Yeah. The program that I teach is totally online. So if a woman or a husband is home alone at night, then they can log in whenever they want to. My administrators go nuts because I have an office hour from midnight till 1 in the morning. And the chancellor of the college got on 1 in the morning and emailed me and said, "You're not really at mine, are you?" And I emailed them back, "Yes, I am." And, well, why are you online? Because the husband or wife are asleep, the kids are in bed, and that's quality time. So that might be a way to get more women in your program.
Yeah, recognizing that there's barriers to that too.
Online programs require that you be a self-starter and be able to manage time wisely, and too many of our students cannot do that.
Yeah, good point. In addition to that, one of the barriers that I've noticed early on is instructional design. Any instructional designers here? I'll tell you why it's important to me, what I've learned. information is not instruction. Too often, we're asking our faculty to create curriculum because we might be subject matter experts at the particular topic. Doesn't mean we know how to write curriculum. It's incredibly complex when we try to take that stuff and put it online. Because if I'm not in front of you, you don't see my voice reflection and all my hand gyrations, you may not get the point, right? So instructional designers understand this. And is your program instructionally designed? I notice you have a degree program, right?
We do. So I am also a public instruction prep from City College of San Francisco, and we have an AS degree program in human network communication technology with an option in web development.
Nice. And you got budgeted to instructionally design that curriculum to put it online?
So separately, I have a master's degree in instructional technology. But at City College, we have for our online courses, we have a very nice program where we get 8 times to do online training that involves instructional design. So we get help through the process of training classes, basically.
Fantastic. And I had a question for you. How much of that issue of different learners, different methodologies, and different styles of learning is addressed by instructional design?
So you can address that. I think that even a well-designed online course, what you say about online learners, kids, you have to finance and you have to all that's true. At City College, we have some learning courses, as well as training courses that help students know what it's going to be successful online students. So, one unit of there's maybe after time, there's how you basically get all your homework done, here's how you do all the things you expect from that. I think you can address some of it, but that time management is
still an issue. Yeah. So all sorts of issues. But instructional design could help in some elements of that, right? But often not funded, and that's often a barrier. So is your program a designer or developer?
We do both. Stephanie Will and I wrote a program for designers and developers.
Yeah.
And our capstone courses we take to designers, and we put them in a room with the developers, and we do real projects for nonprofits.
Okay.
And we're very much in demand from the nonprofits. However, we just canceled the class this semester because it only had 11 students.
Yeah. So 2 thoughts on the female issue. First of all, it's an issue within IT. We're all a bunch of nerds and geeks and pocket protector folks, and maybe that's well deserved. But that said, what we got to do collectively, I think, is change the image of this is a cool job. And by the way, for those that teach web design, haven't you found that a lot of women, I wouldn't say more in all cases, but have you noticed that a lot of women are in web design, but they're not in development? Why is that? Because design is artistic and cool, sizzles that artistically and creatively, but programming is not. So maybe changing your program. I love development, right? But maybe framing it as more of an artistic thing rather than a technical thing might be of value.
I think we have to teach our students that they can do anything they want to do. I'm 100% colorblind. I only see shades of gray. I'm not just red-green colorblind. I'm 100% colorblind. I teach Photoshop class. The art department came to me and said, "You can't teach that class. You're colorblind." I said, "Sit in my classroom." At the end of the semester, they went, "Wow, you really put your kids through the ringer." I said, "Absolutely." And I think that's what you have to get into their mindsets. They can do anything they want to do, especially now.
I got a question for you. Of those offering a degree-level program in design or development, any volunteers on what barriers you had to overcome to get that approved by your respective? I'm assuming everybody had it approved by the state, right? I know South California. Stephanie is actually in charge of that. Anybody else? Anybody else? Is it fair to say that everybody got their course approved by the state? Yeah.
We can't react fast enough is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think can I modify your statement there? Sure.
My wife does all the time.
We can reinspect this. the college and the bureaucracy about PPFS. They keep forgetting that our field isn't like English, isn't like math, isn't like even some of the other sciences. How many of you guys are teaching the same thing you got taught when you got hired? I haven't touched that technology, and I've been teaching for 15 years. And that technology that I got hired to teach doesn't exist anymore. Well, it does, but it's like a high-tech museum down that kind of thing.
I think Gary made a good point during his session earlier today. The field that we're in, oftentimes we're being told, we need to be told when to stop teaching what we're teaching. Okay, we're still teaching the same HTML now that we taught 10 years ago. And I don't think so. So now HTML5 is out. How long are we going to teach HTML5?
Well, when are we going to start teaching HTML5, right? I mean, for some, right? So, you know, one of the audios that I was going to play was an interview, and I bring this up because I think this is a barrier, and I'm curious to know if you feel that this is a barrier. I have a colleague, a WOW Academy, a Web Professional Academy, a member of WOW, offering a degree-level program in the development space in Minnesota. And I asked him, what process did you go through? Anybody ever heard of a DACM process? So I share this with you because I'd like to give this to you, or at least a copy of it by email, this DACM process that he went through, and kind of compare it to your own. The other thing is what he said, which I appreciated, was that his program does not consist of, how should I say, part-time folks testing the waters in development. You have to qualify for his program, and he only accepts those on a track for a degree level focus. Would anybody have a similar situation to that? Did you understand what I was talking about? So what I mean by that is, I think it's a challenge trying to take a classroom with those that want to learn Photoshop so they can get the red eye out, and those that want to learn it to develop for the web. Now, many of you are professional educators, and you may get that, but I see this as problematic, and he agrees. And as a result of that, he basically excludes hobbyists and part-timers from taking the class. And a community college is difficult because we're a community college, right? Does anybody face issues with that?
If we didn't count the part-timers, none of our courses would run. So you might work for the state of California in a department, and the state used to keep your website for you, and along comes a few people and they say, and you're going to keep your own website. Aren't you thrilled?
Aha. Thank you. I tell you why business and industry has a problem with that. When I talk to Google, and I talk to Yahoo, and I talk to Facebook, and I talk to those that are hiring cutting-edge developers, you know what they tell me? We're not delivering students with the skill set that they need to employ them. The problem is, I think, it's a challenge. It's not that we can't overcome it because some of you already are. But the challenge is when you have a student that's in your class and they want to know Photoshop to get the red eye, and you got somebody else sitting next to you wanting to know the complex code, what happens to those two students? This one doesn't get the skills that they need because they want complex code. That's maybe the training. This person wants an education to do some things at home. I understand why we offer that in a community college environment, but at the end of the day, what effect that has, in my humble opinion, because I've been studying this for 13 years, is the quality of the outcome of the resources operated in the school. In other words, if your program is not successful, it might not be because of the market demand. I think far from it. It's because the courses that are offered are not meeting the needs of those that need to get the job. Now, you may find that mean, but it's the reality. Because employers are telling me those red-eye skills are not going to do it. I need the in-depth level of skills to be able to accomplish these very specific tasks. And I just throw that out because I see that as a challenge, because many of the programs that I see, I'll give you an example. When I pick up a brochure of some community colleges in this country that offer a web design or development program, it's Dreamweaver, Introduction to HTML. Simple, I mean, David, am I stretching the core here? So I think to me, candidly, it's the chicken or the egg. I'm convinced that if we build a quality, comprehensive program that maps to the hiring of the individuals like Google, Facebook, and others, then we are actually meeting the needs educationally of those individuals. Yeah.
So since you've had conversations with the companies, what is it that they want besides the enough?
Good question. Thanks for asking. I have interviews of them, by the way. So if you go to webprofessionals.org, which I invite you to do, subscribe to the blog, because you'll find that I'm on a mission organizationally to go out and meet those individuals and interview them, to ask them specifically, what do you need? And David, can you address from a developer standpoint, what are you finding that employers are asking for the most?
In our area, the biggest downfall that we have, and it goes back to your question earlier, isn't necessarily in the developmental skills as much as it is project management, time management, system analysis and design, in those areas. And once you get them a good foundation there, then you can teach them the other skills, the other tools that they need. But if you can't teach them that up front, they're not going to develop the other ones down the track.
I hear that quite often. But how about web standards? How many of you are practicing web standards? Okay.
What I do with the two different students,
yeah.
The student who wants to get the red eye out drops before halfway, because they
get intimidated
with my development class,
right.
Where by halfway we're going to do a project where you write a shopping cart.
Right.
And they
awesome.
can't handle it. They got what they needed. They're gone.
So are you happy? I mean, that's
slack from higher ups. That half your class is gone.
That's a barrier, and we collectively have to overcome that.
Yeah.
Because to me, it's the chicken or the egg. I'm convinced if we develop programs, we can get rid of. Right. So good point. Let's get to your question on the skills. Okay, let's talk about web standards. Good, that's the bottom line. Well, how many, out of the people that said they're web standards, they're teaching web standards, can I get a volunteer to explain what that means to you? Yeah.
This is my soapbox.
Nice.
And I've been really heavily incorporating accessibility. But I think it's the separation of content from your use semantic markup, use only those tags that actually describe it, get away from your attributes that are unnecessary. They have to validate XHTML.
Oh, that's quotable. I hope we got that on record.
But they might have to upgrade old colors. I tell them they have to know how it works before they know how to fix it. So there's a few things, frame sets that I typically teach. And this is getting to the my textbook comes out.
And we got a class for you. Online coming to a browser near you.
Are you teaching necessary accessibility, or are you teaching universal design?
I am teaching, I'll tell you, I see that if you teach universal design, you're going to have accessibility. I want them to be aware, however, of these things. And so it's been smaller steps. I'm having to use that in my current curriculum, and it's hard to make room. So this last semester, I really had to focus on just some real specific things. How do you make form more accessible? How do you make tables? What are accessible tables? Well, they're data tables. How do you make those more accessible? And they actually, the first time they looked at linear writing tables to be able to see exactly what a screen reader is.
Cool.
So I'm so fortunate. I was listening to you guys talking about these barriers, and I do what I want, what I feel is most important. My barrier is just trying to say, is to know how to fit it in and say something what industry wants. And I don't know what industry wants. And I see 50% attrition because people come in and they think, this is kind of learning how to do HTML like we did in high school, and I'm going to put a picture up there, and I'm going to put a paragraph on the page, and it's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just get the conversation off of there.
Fair enough. Of those students that are actually taking those more in-depth, comprehensive courses that we believe meet industry demand, are those individuals finding employment?
They come to me, and we offer the maintenance degree with 3 as my web development instructor. We actually have coordinated it with the graphics department. our graphics department teaches them pretty things, and for a long time, their graphics web development class was let's create a huge graphic, and then we're going to chop it and dice and put it in tables and it will be good. And I'm cringing, and he's coming around. He's starting to
That's a long-term process, isn't it?
Oh, my word, it's been slow.
Yeah.
I'm not teaching this is not.
Yeah.
Put a blindfold on them with a screen reader and say, that's
Oh, my
page.
gosh, suddenly. I show my students, it's this lovely side now. Let's look at the color to see what the screen reader is going to read. And there's nothing on there. But, image 1, image 3,000, you all know.
So you touched on some specific skills. Did that kind of answer the question? I think to David's point, though, we got to... Yeah, JavaScript, PHP, some in-depth stuff. That's what, if you listen to the interviews that I conduct of those enterprise-level organizations ask for, she nailed it, okay? But I want to make a distinction here because having those skill sets, whether you work for enterprise or small business, is important. But I have to tell you, most of that would really appeal to the enterprise, large corporations. Having said that, not everybody goes to work for Google, Yahoo, right? 80%, here's a statistic for you. 80% of those working for IT work for non-IT companies, right? Pardon me. We're not preparing people realistically at the end of the day to go to work for Google. I mean, that would be the dream job, right? Go to work for Facebook. But we're training people to go to work for freelance or small corporations.
How many of you that are training for an IT industry that doesn't really know what they're hiring for? Oh.
Yeah, and there's another element to that 80%. Out of that population, over 80% work for small business, right? So 80% work for non-IT companies, churches, schools, hospitals, et cetera, small business, and then over 80% work for small business. So what's really particularly complex about this particular arena or profession, you have to have those skills to be a freelance if you're going to be successful. But to David's point, you have to be the freelancer that has project management, communication, personality. But I got to tell you,
That's a bachelor's degree. Yeah.
hey, it really is a bachelor's degree, right? Or at least some equivalent. I got to tell you that every day as a web professional organization, I get a call from somebody that says, I just got ripped off from my web professional. And you see these commercials. Anybody seen the Intuit commercial today? I couldn't get a hold of my web professional. They never returned my call, right? So now we have a situation where the web professionals may possess the technical skills, but has no people skills, no business skills, no contract skills. And oh, by the way, has anybody ever heard of a change order? I'm here to tell you, if you're a practicing web professional and you don't know what a change order is, you might as well not be in business. You know why? Because customers don't know what they want, and they'll say, I didn't realize that I know I penciled that out, but scrap that, let's start all over again. And these poor web professionals are out there humping, and then they're doing this for free. That's got to change, right? So, yeah, right. So having the skills, David, to your point, of the soft skills are just as equally important. In fact, many companies, including the Yahoos, the Googles, the folks that I talk to in the Silicon Valley, say, Bill, bring me somebody with those skills, and I'll send them over to get a web standards course, right? Okay, so why is this important? Why are we here today? I think we're here today to talk about opportunities for you to collaborate with us on these topics. Gary, with you, what are some of the opportunities from your point of view?
Well, I think the biggest opportunity is to identify your best practices. And to do that, in the K-12 system, I'm working with a group of teachers. I'm not working with the community colleges that much, although we do have you in our symposiums. We have developed CTV Online, which is a sharing of curriculum. If you go to CTV Online, you'll find that you can become part of an IT community, and you can share lesson plans, unit plans, and download it. So I think this is probably one of the best things you can do as far as sharing practices. You can document your curriculum, and you can revise it, you can keep it just to yourself, and you can share it out to others. So there's a platform for sharing curriculum that I think is a very useful tool.
Yeah, David, how about you? What's the benefits of collaboration with a professional association or a business and industry?
Probably one of the easiest examples for me is, has anybody gone to careerpathways.org? If you haven't, you should. Because if you're going to sit across the table from a high school teacher and say, how can we get your guys, and this happened to me last year, and let me tell you, it's really cool. I had a student graduate from West Hills College with his AA degree on Thursday night, and then get his high school diploma on Friday night. But the Career Pathway gives you that piece of paper to sit down with a parent or sit down with a high school instructor and say, here's how we're going to get to our target. Here's the pathway we're going to follow. And it's not something I came up with in the middle of the San Joaquin Valley. It's something that instructors from all over the state of California had input into and said, this is what we need to be teaching in our classrooms. So to me, that's a real example of both shared perspective and a shared resource.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that, to the industry standards. You brought up the point of you're not quite 100% certain what industry is asking for. It's clear that if 2 heads are better than 1, 10's better than 2, and I think both Mid-Pacific Center and WOW would agree that we got to come up with some standard that we can all agree to and adhere to in this industry, because it's all over the map. The titles are all over the map. The pathways oftentimes are all over the map. What we need is a program that's comprehensive, that's vetted by those that need to vet it, including working with ONET. For example, our web developer program was in collaboration with ONET. We need to work together on really leveraging that relationship, because you can't do this all on our own, right? So we need to get together more often, whether it's online or face-to-face, discuss these issues, adhere to standards. What are the skills? What are the specific skills? And we have some resources for you, by the way, and others that want to know the granularity. Let us get your contact number, and we'll send you a care package of stuff that you can use in the classroom, including outlines, lesson plans, free resources that you could use today, written oftentimes by instructional designers that really get it, that have a passion for teaching these topics, including, in-depth web standards. So
oftentimes, as community college teachers, we're willing to share our information. We're not hiding it in our secret vaults. But it's conferences like this that bring us together that say, oh my God, they're doing what we're doing, but they're doing it better. I want to go talk to that person. And that's where the real importance for me of a conference like this is, that I get to meet you all, because living in the middle of the central San Joaquin Valley, let me tell you, I don't really know what big industry was, because we don't have all that much.
One of the things I'm going to pass around is relevant, I think, to that, and relevant to a couple of the questions about how do we keep up with this stuff. I'm going to pass these around. Here's a card that we made to promote career technical education. Somebody said, somebody asked a question about emails. Well, for me, one of the things we came up with, in a small way, but we hope in an impactful way and meaningful way, is to come up with a strategy that talks about why should anybody care. We have an image problem in this industry, but I think we also have an issue of education that needs to take place on multiple levels and multiple stakeholders. We need to educate government, policy decision makers. We need to collectively educate parents, other interested parties, including consumers of technologies and those that would hire web professionals, why they should care. And so one of the reasons we developed this YCTE website and portal, which is updated hourly on anything career technical education oriented, was to answer some of those questions, including interviews, why anybody should care. We also created one, and you'll find the link here, to WhyITNow, because we have introduced, in collaboration with the Department of Education here in California, an initiative simply called WhyITNow, because it occurred to me after being asked by the Department of Ed to help support IT that we're promoting web professional titles in an environment that we're still battling the information technology clog. In other words, there's a gap between the understanding of technology in general. It's not utilized as much as we think it is, both by small business, and that results in a negative effect on productivity and profitability. So we have, I guess in short, I shared this with you because it will give you a link to not only me, because it's got my address on it, my phone number, but also to interviews that I've conducted with Gary, James Jones at Impact, and David, and others, including some of those principals at those organizations that I mentioned. So I invite you to check it out and subscribe. How are we doing on time? We need to wrap it up. That's the wrap it up. So listen, if you could we pass out a sheet? Could somebody start a sheet? Let's start collaborating together, because you have something that you need. She has something that you need. Why can't we follow up with each other? And I promise you, I won't spam you with stuff. If you start a list, I promise you the resources that I mentioned earlier about the pathways for web design development, best practices, interviews, instructional design videos that will give you kind of some understanding of, again, just to recap what she said, as well as links to the type of curriculum that David has so graciously been willing to share and has shared for the last 13 years. We need to stop reinventing the wheel, because we don't have the time or the money to do this anymore. We need to work smarter, not harder. So we need to circle the wagons of those within the web profession, and I think elevate the profession to the level that it deserves to be. So with that, gentlemen, Gary, David, thank you very much. James, thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Bill, and Gary, and Dave.